And that's actually not theater's job to fix. That is not my art's job. Hi, it's me, Amari, the Thespian Therapist. I'm giving step 3 of how I fell back in love with my art. Is that I stopped asking my art to heal my trauma. Raise your hand if you had a hard time fitting in until you found theater and then you just never looked back. Yeah, this isn't the story of everyone, but that's a very common thing if you made a pie chart of why people do theater. I have not been shy about my desire to be an ingenue, a princess, a love interest. I have parted ways with representation over disputes about how I am perceived and considered by casting and producers. I have tried to force the industry to see me. But after years of just being perceived as the funny and brassy and unserious bestie or whatever, and having to truly fight for my life to be considered as serious and a leading lady, I had to consider why it mattered to me so much to do those kinds of roles. The ones that felt like closer extensions of my inner life than just leaning into the thing that I could clearly do that would make me money, my agents or managers money. People were here for all of that. And so what was my issue with that? I'm going to pivot for a second and give you a little bit of a therapist perspective about something. There are several kinds of trauma responses. The four most common are fight and flight, which you probably already know, freeze, which you may recognize as procrastination, indecision, lack of motivation, but the last one is appease or fawn. And examples of this last one are people-pleasing, perfectionism, gluttony, me, is she? It's really only recently that people have even recognized appeasing others as a trauma response because it doesn't really disrupt much of how our society works. People who are appeased trauma responses cater to other people, and so they abandon their own needs and wants to make themselves more digestible to others. And because other people benefit from that, it is usually almost admired as a quality. Easygoing, low maintenance, attentive, nurturing. And there isn't anything inherently negative about those qualities, but when it's happening as a trauma response, it's because the person constantly feels unsafe and dysregulated as opposed to a genuine desire to show up that way. That resistance to being relegated to the side was because I had been unintentionally regulating myself to the side in my everyday relationships. I wanted to be seen as lovable, as desirable, as important. I was a queen of singing a sad, heartbroken song at Broadway sessions because I wanted people to know that I felt those feelings too. Despite being a larger-bodied Black girl, despite hiding behind my humor, despite doing such a good job of taking care of everyone else, I wanted to feel like I mattered. And that's actually not theater's job to fix. That is not my art's job. Working on correcting or adjusting negative beliefs about myself like I'm unlovable, I'm not enough, I don't matter, that is work that I needed to do for myself, not that I should expect my means of employment to answer. And don't get me wrong, having a fulfilling job where you feel like you are effective and valued is absolutely so healing. It's actually a really big part of why I love being a therapist so much. I am so honored to be a part of people's journeys in a way to help them love themselves the way that I have learned to love myself. But stepping into a role that helps you love more about yourself is incredibly powerful. So I'm not knocking that. But that isn't what is really being offered to a large portion of professional performers. I tell my clients that work as creatives all the time that if Brenda at the bank has a bad day, she doesn't question her self-worth because she's at work, not at therapy. And while there is a lot of conversation about building a thick skin and dealing with rejection, I think that there isn't actually enough conversation had about the emotional transition from a young person finding permission to step into themselves through theater and the realities of being an adult and providing for yourself with a career in commercial theater. And so people who are desperate for acceptance and validation allow themselves to be mistreated and taken advantage of because it's the only place they've ever felt valued or free. And then we tell them that if you're a real artist, you won't be able to fathom doing anything else, and you'll spend all your time building your craft. So instead of finding other places to get their needs met or finding hobbies that help them express themselves or even just to relieve stress, they keep collecting more evidence for the belief that they are simply not enough or inherently lacking value unless they are booked and #blessed. And so people stay quiet about abuse. People feed into a toxic system. People are so desperate to be seen and accepted, and they feel like if they don't engage in this way, it's their fault because they couldn't hack it or were not invested enough. And I absolutely believe in the healing power of art. I use it in my therapy sessions all the time. And I believe that it shouldn't be the only way that we express our pain or explore our inner lives.